And now we return to our main story of the night, Ukraine. It will gain key new technologies, potentially Patriot interceptors, and more money for defense. And now joining me is Distinguished Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, Thomas Graham. Hello, sir, and thank you so much for joining us on World News Tonight.
Happy to be with you.
Well, great to have you. So let's start with the Storm Shadow licensing that was announced earlier today for Ukraine's independence. Will Ukraine produce them domestically, or is it more likely that they will take key technology from this system and apply them to, say, their domestically produced weapons?
I think it's probably a bit of both. They have the opportunity to do it. I think Ukraine has demonstrated over the past 4 years that it's very innovative in its approach, and it will take advantage of all the opportunities it has. It's not going to limit itself to one option.
Right. Now, in terms of what this will do for Ukraine, I mean, is this a game changer, or is this just another tool in the box?
Well, I always hesitate to use the word game changer. This conflict has been going on for 4.5 years at this point. Ukraine has experienced tremendous ups and tremendous downs. This does improve Ukraine's position at this point. It gives them another opportunity. It will enhance its deep strikes into Russia. But to argue that this is going to change the course of this conflict, I think, is an exaggeration at this point. It's still going to be a very difficult struggle. Russia has options as well, as we've seen over the past several weeks, and it has been increasing its attacks on Ukraine. So we're going to continue to see a very bloody and very difficult war of attrition in the weeks ahead.
Right. Now, are you concerned at all about escalation? Russia has previously threatened to hit weapons factories supplying Ukraine, even if Europe, if need be, so they say. Is licensing a way to mitigate those threats? And are these Russian threats, are they empty threats, or are they something that we should always have in mind?
Well, look, I mean, it's clear that the conflict has been escalating over the past several months. We have very much a standstill on the battlefield. I think that's true, but the aerial conflict has been escalating in recent weeks. We've seen increasing Ukrainian deep strikes into Russia with greater accuracy, some increasing attacks even on the Caspian Sea. Russia has accelerated its attacks with ballistic missiles, taking advantage of Ukraine's lack of appropriate interceptors. We've seen this the battle for the Black Sea accelerate as well in recent weeks. So I think we need to take the risk of escalation seriously. We need to treat with due care Russia's threat of retaliation in some way. You can never take that off the table. I think it's true that Russia has not retaliated as intensely as many people had anticipated, despite the rhetoric coming out of Moscow. But I think it would be a mistake for Western countries, for Europe, to underestimate the chance of a retaliatory attack. So take it seriously and prepare accordingly.
Mm-hmm. We've generally been encouraged by Ukraine's long-range strike campaign on Russia, but at the same time, Russia has put some big hurt on Ukraine, targeting trains, food storage warehouses, and even ships carrying grain have stopped sailing from Odessa and southern Ukrainian ports. Will Ukraine's strikes on wild berries and energy infrastructure make the lives difficult for average Russians that will put the pressure on to potentially stop the war, or is that somehow misconstrued or a misbelief?
Well, look, I mean, it's clear that the Ukrainian strikes are complicating the economic situation in Russia. It is creating problems for the average Russian. But Russian society is not one where popular pressure is going to cause radical rethinking inside the Kremlin. President Putin is still in control of the situation. He is still determined to to press on to meet his maximal demands in Ukraine. And so I think the conflict will continue. As I said, there is a risk of escalation. What we need at this point is really a serious set of negotiations to try to move this conflict towards resolution. At some point, Europeans are going to have to talk to the Russians, as the Ukrainians are. But I think most important at this point is getting the United States re-engaged in an effective fashion to conduct a serious set of negotiations. The sooner we end this conflict, I think, the better. The goal is to preserve Ukrainian independence and sovereignty, its European aspirations. That, I think, is possible at this point. And then we will see how we can develop Ukraine and develop Ukraine's relations with Europe in the future.
Our correspondent earlier in the program noted the very noticeable absence of U.S. officials at the celebrations for Ukraine's Independence Day today. That being said, the situation with the Europeans has become very different. The Europeans now own this war. Where do we go from here in terms of getting the United States back on track? Is still Kushner and Witkoff the people to be able to do this?
Well, look, there are a couple of things here that are critical. First, it's, as everyone knows, the Iran conflict has distracted the administration. It's focused on that and hasn't devoted the attention to the Russia-Ukraine conflict that it should at this point. As far as Witkoff and Kushner are concerned, they are critical elements in this negotiation, in part because of the trust they enjoy from President Trump, and also their ability to deal with President Putin. All that said, I think they have to be supplemented with some individuals who have greater expertise. I think they also need to balance the trips to Moscow with trips to Kyiv to demonstrate that they are being as even-handed in trying to reach an appropriate compromise as possible. That said, I think it's also true that the United States' interest is in the survival of Ukraine. It does have a horse or dog in this fight. That doesn't mean that it can't be an important mediator that pushes towards a resolution of this conflict. But we do want, as I said, to see Ukraine survive as a sovereign and independent country that is integrating into the European system.
I'd like to follow up on what you said about the Europeans potentially engaging the Kremlin and starting to talk serious talk. The Prime Minister Burnham in Kyiv today said that Russia cannot have territory that it can't take by force, which leaves still the small territory in the Donbass that Russia is direly trying to take. Let's just play devil's advocate for 1 minute, if Ukraine loses this territory, will Russia by any means theoretically stop there, or will it want to continue to take the rest of Zaporizhia or other regions of Ukraine as it sees fit?
Well, that's a decision that will be made in the Kremlin, and part of that will depend on its assessment of how the cost of taking the rest of the Donbass. But as we know, Russia annexed the full territory of Zaporizhia and Kherson. Much of that territory is still retained by Ukraine, so it's quite possible that if Russia gains all the territory in Donbass, that it will continue to move in Zaporizhia and Kherson as well. I think the final point here is to remember that even if Russia occupies all this territory, that doesn't end the conflict. There are still serious questions of security, other goals that Russia has set for its war against Ukraine. All those things we have to bear in mind. It is going to take a difficult set of negotiations to produce a lasting ceasefire, and beyond that, a durable settlement that, as I said, guarantees the sovereignty of Ukraine in the future and allows it to integrate into the European system.
All right. Well, Thomas Graham, Distinguished Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, thank you so much for this discussion. Very much appreciated.
You're certainly welcome.
And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time. Good night.